given all that's happening in Rafah right now with this horrific slaughter, but at the same time, as we're seeing that, we also, if we follow any other reports from maybe more credible sources like Al Mayadeen, that follows the resistance pretty closely, we hear also that the fighting is very fierce, not just in Rafah, but all across the Gaza Strip. So, could you talk about how the resistance has been able to do this? I mean, why is it that Israel's stated aims, all of its bluster, why is it that it has not been able to achieve anything that it claims it wanted to achieve? There are some who suspect that it didn't want to achieve any of this at all. But at the same time, there is a military campaign that's going on, even if it is a genocidal one. Why is it that Israel has been such a monumental failure up until this point?
Before I respond, I should add something, and that is that in addition to Iran's response to the Israeli regime, Iran said that we have changed the equation, and that from now on, if the Israeli regime carries out strikes against Iranians or Iranian assets, we will immediately respond. That is a big change. And ever since the Iranian attack, we have not seen the Israelis strike Iranian targets in Syria. So I think that is also an indication of how the Israelis have been forced to shift their policy, their military policy. And it again shows that Iran has the advantage. With regards to Gaza, I think that, this is not just about Gaza, the same is true in Lebanon. The underground network in Lebanon is much more extensive than Gaza. And that's why the Israelis won't dare attack Lebanon. They won't dare invade Lebanon because Hezbollah's capabilities are far greater than that of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. And Hezbollah also has allies in Lebanon, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other groups that work with it. These tunnels have basically made air power almost meaningless because the resistance fighters, they are deep underground. There are hundreds in Gaza, hundreds of kilometers of different tunnels. And then there are smaller tunnels which they dig and carry out operations, and then they wreck those tunnels, and then they create more tunnels. So under Gaza, there is a city of tunnels with hospitals, with different centers for troops to rest, and command centers, and so on. The same is true in Lebanon. The same is true in Yemen. So this has made the Air Force and their helicopter capabilities ineffective. And whenever the Israeli regime says that we bombed this hospital, or we bombed this neighborhood, or we bombed these tents because there was a senior Hamas figure there, they're lying. Everyone, these Hamas commanders are all underground. None of them are walking around among tents or in buildings or anything like that. The Israelis are just justifying their genocide. And the Western media will repeat what the Israelis say, even though they know that Hamas is underground. If they weren't, then this devastation, then the war in Gaza would have ended within a few days. And I actually said, I think almost on the first day, that Gaza will not fall. And I told some of my Palestinian friends who were very concerned that it will not fall. And it wasn't because I've ever been to Gaza, but it's because people who know what's happening, people who have more knowledge about these issues, they know what's going on in the West Bank, in Gaza, and Lebanon, and Syria, and elsewhere. They were confident that Gaza would not fall. So militarily, the big advantage that the Israeli regime had, which was its air force, its capabilities in the air, was made useless, or more or less useless. The second was that the Israeli regime always monitors. It uses American intelligence gathering I mean, all of these technologies that people think Israel has, they're all American. Israel is just a small colony, and then the Americans may invest bring in a few companies and so on. But all this is just American. The Israelis are a weak and vulnerable regime, and now we're seeing it. We're seeing how vulnerable it is. It's only carrying out this war against the people of Gaza with Western support, with these constant, with the British and the Americans and others constantly bringing in new weapons and ammunition. But in any case, the Israeli regime would gather intelligence from Gaza, but throughout the years, not just through high-tech capabilities, but also by gathering information about people who are vulnerable, someone who may have, I don't know, had an illicit sexual relationship, or someone who may have been gay, or someone who may have done something wrong against their family, and they would use that information and force people to work as collaborators for them. So the Israelis had different means to gather intelligence about Gaza. But what happened was that through these tunnels, because of these tunnels, the Israelis found it very difficult to get information, because the information, the tunnels were used to send messages, to receive messages, whether by motorcycles or by phones that are just internally connected to one another, military phones. So the Israelis lost the ability to understand what was really going on in Gaza. And that is why I think the Israeli regime really never understood how capable the resistance was and how complex these tunnels were. Do you remember? I'm sure you remember that during the first days they were saying that we're going to flood the tunnels with seawater, and we're going to gas the resistance fighter tunnels. Well, what happened? These tunnels are very complex and sophisticated, and they were developed to prevent the Israeli regime from doing this sort of thing. And if you've noticed, and I'm sure we've all noticed, that we constantly get footage of resistance fighters taking out Israeli soldiers or tanks, but there's very little footage of the Israeli regime murdering resistance fighters. And I think that shows that how incapable the regime has become, and that has made them very angry and frustrated, and has led to them increasing the number, or intensifying the genocide. And it is a genocide, and we all know that the Israelis have stopped food and water and electricity. They declared it from day one. And the West knows this. The West supports this. They assist the Israeli regime in starving Gazans. It's a collective war against women and children. But in any case, on the battlefield, the Israeli regime has lost. The same is true in Lebanon. Hezbollah has forced the Israeli regime to empty its towns and small cities in northern Palestine, in occupied Palestine, in Israel. And the Israelis have not been able to do a thing about it. They've been threatening Lebanon for months now that we're going to punish you, we're going to destroy your country, we're going to take it out against all the Lebanese people, which again shows how barbaric the regime is. They threaten ordinary people everywhere. But they haven't done anything because they know that Hezbollah, if this war intensifies further, the Israeli regime has lots of sensitive targets that can be destroyed. Lebanon doesn't have those targets. The military targets are basically underground, and everything else is just our homes and towns. But because of the sanctions and because of the policies of the West, Lebanon doesn't even have electricity. There's very little electricity in the country. So the damage that Hezbollah can do to Israel by destroying its power plants, for example, is far greater than what the Israeli can do to Lebanon.
All right. Well, I mean, I think that was all very important, and I wanted to ask you. I'm sure we will talk again, actually, before this actually all bears fruit, because this appears to be. I think all indications are this is a very protracted struggle that is happening right now. Very protracted war of resistance happening right now in Gaza. But how do you see this ending for the Israelis then? Because there seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel. There appears to be more massacres, more absolute war crimes, but no real light at the end of the tunnel. And as Operation True Promise and and why that occurred, Israel's bombing of the embassy, the murder of very prominent people within the Iranian military. Tell me what you think about how do you think this will end for the Israeli regime?
Well, I think the only thing that exists at the end of the tunnel for the Israelis is more Hezbollah fighters and more Hamas fighters and more Islamic Jihad fighters and more Ansarullah troops. And there is no escape from defeat. There is no road to victory without a doubt, but there's also no road to that will allow them to escape defeat. Every day that this genocide continues only makes it worse for the West and the Israeli regime. The world has turned against the Israeli regime, and it is only entrenching the hatred. A younger generation, day after day, is witnessing this genocide take place, and they're witnessing how Western regimes support the genocide, how they're arming the genocidal forces, how Western media, the BBC, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, Sky News, Fox News, everyone is trying to help the Israeli regime carry out the genocide with minimal cost. This has been devastating for the West. The Israeli regime, which pretended, along with the West, that it was some regional superpower, has been shown to be weak and vulnerable. It has been shown to be genocidal. And therefore, the whole of the global South is marginalizing the regime, and it is causing the West to be marginalized. Never again can the United States or the Europeans bark about human rights or about human dignity or women's rights or children's rights or minorities or anything. They have to remain silent. They cannot talk about China when after what they've done to Gaza. They can't talk about Russia or anyone for that matter after what they've done. So this every day that this continues, it only entrenches that anger and animosity and hatred. On the other hand, the resistance has become much more confident. The Hamas has not been severely damaged. It continues to fight across the board, and so is the same is true with Islamic Jihad and its allies. They can continue this battle indefinitely. They have new recruits. They're making new tunnels. They have the weapons. They've shown the Israeli Netanyahu claimed that he will take when they take Rafah or when they attack the south, it'll be finished. Nothing has finished. They're fighting losing battles across the board from north to south in Gaza. So the longer this takes, the greater the defeat will be. And ironically, this is all happening as the West is losing in Ukraine and as the West is intensifying conflict with China. So it is only making it worse because managing all these crises at the same time for the West is simply not possible, especially as the West is much weaker today than it was 20, 25 years ago, partially because of their endless wars, partially because of liberal capitalism and the consequences such as the crisis in 2008 and 9 and so on. The United States is not the United States of 30, 40, 50 years ago. The Europeans are much weaker as well. So I don't see any good outcome for the forces of genocide, and also those countries that were quiet, the longer that this lasts, the more unstable they become. Remember, when the so-called Arab Spring or the awakening or the Islamic awakening or whatever one calls it, when it happened, it began in Tunisia. The whole region was quiet. But when it happened, when that young man, I think, burned himself alive, it brought about not only the overthrow of the regime, but it also brought about the overthrow of the Egyptian regime, and Saudi Arabia and other countries in the Persian Gulf were terrified about how it could spread to the Persian Gulf region. Today, those countries that are seen to be on the side of the Israeli regime or trading with the regime or having political relations with the regime, their people are going to look at them as traitors. Even Turkey, they've spent so much money on destroying Syria and supporting these, terrorists, but they have not. The Turkish government continues to have relations with the Israeli regime, and even as we speak, trade continues after 8 months of what's going on. So it's going to have implications for any government, any politician, any regime that has been seen as siding with the Israeli regime. And we may not see that, we may not see anything today, but remember, right before October the 7th, Jake Sullivan in a speech said that the Middle East, and of course I don't like the term Middle East, it's West Asia, I think it's an Orientalist term, but the Middle East, as he called it, I think he said it has been the most quiet that it's been for many years. And literally days later, we had October the 7th. So when you have these family dictatorships that are working, that are pursuing policies that are completely in opposition to what the demands of the people are, there will be consequences. And therefore, I think that even if there is a ceasefire, I don't think that will be the end of the story. And the longer this continues, the more potential instability there is for those regimes that were quiet or indifferent or let alone supportive of this apartheid regime.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.